The identity of the 9th was established by identification of the clothes by family members. It has been proved that all 9 victims had been held prisoners by the KLA in the prison camp, and that they were in the group that remained under KLA guard in the Berisa Mountains on the 25th or 26th of July 1998, after about half of the prisoners were set free. Forensic examination discloses that 6 of the 9 victims died from bullet wounds fired from Kalashnikov rifles, which was the type of weapon used by the KLA guards. The precise cause of death of the other 3 bodies was not identified by forensic examination. These 3 bodies, however, had fractures of bones caused at about the time of death. Some bodies had been shot more than once. The Chamber is satisfied from this compelling body of evidence that 9 of the prisoners from the Lapushnik prison camp were executed that day in the Berisa Mountains by KLA guards. The written judgment details the evidence and the identity of these victims. The prosecution has therefore established that 9 identified detainees from the Lapushnik prison camp were murdered in the Berisa Mountains as alleged in count 10 of the indictment. From what has been said so far, it will be apparent that the prosecution has proved that civilians were detained by the KLA in a prison camp in a farm compound in Lapushnik in June and July 1998, and that 3 of these prisoners were murdered by KLA soldiers at the camp. Most of these prisoners were subjected to cruel treatment, and 4 were tortured while they were imprisoned by the KLA. Further, it has been proved by the prosecution that 9 identified prisoners from the camp were murdered in the nearby Berishe Mountains by KLA guards on the day the KLA were forced to abandon the prison camp. There remains the further critical issue whether the 3 accused, Fatmir Limaj, Haradin Bala and Isak Musliu, or any of them, have been proved to have been criminally responsible for any of the offences which have been established by the prosecution. In this respect, in addition to direct personal involvement, it is also alleged in the indictment that 2 of the accused, Fatmir Limaj and Isak Musliu, are guilty of the offences charged for their failure to prevent or punish the criminal conduct of their subordinates in the KLA. While it is clear that these accused were, at times after those relevant to the indictment, in positions of command in the KLA, and that Fatmir Limaj later became a member of the General Staff, the present issue is whether in May to July 1998 they had positions of command in respect of the Lapushnik prison camp. For the reasons set out in the written judgment, the Chamber finds that the prosecution has not proved that either of these two accused was in a position of command or had effective control over KLA soldiers involved in the Llapushnik prison camp. Therefore, in this case, the issue of criminal responsibility of the three accused essentially, though not solely, turns on the question of identification. This has been one to which the Chamber has given a great deal of close attention. A few witnesses purported to have seen Fatmir Limaj in the Llapushnik prison camp at various times, and one witness purported to have seen him in the Berisa Mountains speaking to one of the KLA guards sometime before the execution of the 9 prisoners. There was also evidence that Fatmir Limaj had not been in the prison camp and was never in the Berisa Mountains on the day of the executions. While the Chamber was not persuaded of the honesty of one of the witnesses who purported to identify Fatmir Limaj, and has had to consider with care the reliability of the others, the balance of the evidence on this issue did indicate the strong possibility that Fatmir Limaj was the KLA member who was known in the camp to some prisoners as Commander Chelaku. Nevertheless, for reasons fully set out in the written judgment, on a final review of the evidence, the Chamber finds that it has not been proved beyond reasonable doubt by the prosecution that the accused Fatmir Limaj had any role in the prison camp or in the executions in the Berisa Mountains, or that he has criminal responsibility for any of the offences with which he is charged. With respect to the accused Haradin Bala, the evidence relevant to his identification is more extensive and varied. A number of witnesses have purported to identify him as the KLA guard known as Shala, who was active in the prison camp in June and July 1998. In that role, Shala had relatively frequent contact with the prisoners. Generally, he had the keys, and often he brought food and water to the prisoners. A number of witnesses also purported to identify the accused Haradin Bala as one of the 2 or perhaps 3 armed KLA guards who escorted the remaining prisoners from the prison camp to the nearby Berishe Mountains when the KLA had to abandon the prison camp on the 25th or 26th of July 1998. The Chamber is not able to be satisfied about the honesty of all of these witnesses. With respect to other witnesses, the Chamber has had to consider closely the reliability of each of these identifications of the accused Haradin Bala as the guard they knew as Shala in the prison camp and in the Berishe Mountains on the last day. There are many factors relevant to this which the Chamber has set out in its written judgment. The Chamber has also had to consider other relevant evidence, especially evidence that suggested that Haradin Bala was not in Llapushnik during the relevant period, and evidence which suggested that because of poor health he could not have done some of the things described by the witnesses and alleged in the indictment. Having weighed carefully the effect of all of this evidence, for reasons which the Chamber has set out in its written judgment, the Chamber finds that the prosecution has proved, beyond reasonable doubt, that the accused Haradin Bala is the KLA guard known as Shala, who was involved in the running of the prison camp in Llapushnik and who escorted the remaining prisoners to the Berisa Mountains on the 25th or 26th of July 1998. The Chamber has gone on to consider, therefore, whether it has been proved that the accused Haradin Bala is personally or otherwise criminally responsible for any of the charged offences which have been proved to have occurred. Having weighed the evidence dealing with these issues, the Chamber has found that the prosecution has not proved that Haradin Bala is criminally responsible for any of the 3 murders of prisoners at the camp, that is, count 8. But the prosecution has proved that Haradin Bala is guilty of cruel treatment, that is, count 6, for having mistreated 3 individual prisoners and aided in another episode of mistreatment of one of those prisoners, and for his personal role in the maintenance and enforcement of the inhumane conditions of detention in the prison camp. And that the prosecution has proved that Haradin Bala aided the torture of 1 prisoner, that is, count 4. And further, that Haradin Bala, jointly with 1 or perhaps 2 other KLA guards, murdered 9 prisoners from the prison camp in the Berisa Mountains on the 25th or 26th of July 1998. That is, count 10. There was little evidence to identify the accused Isak Musliu as having any kind of involvement in the prison camp. The evidence relied on by the prosecution has been set out and considered by the Chamber in the written judgment. In the Chamber's finding, the evidence presented fails to establish that Isak Musliu had any involvement in the events charged or in the running of the prison camp, or that on any other basis he is criminally responsible for any of the offences with which he is charged in the indictment. Fatmir, Limaj, would you please stand? The Chamber finds you not guilty on all counts in the indictment. The Chamber orders that you be immediately released from the United Nations Detention Unit, subject to the completion of the necessary modalities. You may be seated. Haradin Bala, would you please stand? The Chamber finds you guilty, pursuant to Article 7.1 of the statute, of the following offences. Count 4, torture, a violation of the laws or customs of war under Article 3 of the statute for having aided the torture of a prisoner named in the written disposition. Count 6, cruel treatment, a violation of the laws or customs of war under Article 3 of the statute for having personally mistreated 3 prisoners and aided another episode of mistreatment of one of those prisoners, and for your personal role in the maintenance and enforcement of inhumane conditions of detention in the Llapushnik prison camp. And count 10, murder, a violation of the laws or customs of war under Article 3 of the statute for having personally participated in the murder of 9 detainees who are named in the written disposition in the Berisa Mountains on the 25th or 26th of July 1998. The Chamber finds you not guilty on all other counts in the indictment. With respect to sentence, the Chamber has set out in the written judgment the many factors it has taken into account in assessing the appropriate sentence. In particular, the Chamber has taken into account the sentencing structure in the former Yugoslavia and sentences imposed in this tribunal for offences in some way similar to those of which you have been convicted. The Chamber would emphasise that in its findings, your role in the prison camp was that of a guard. You were not in a position of command or authority. In particular, in connection with the murders in the Berisa Mountains, in the Chamber's finding, you were acting as a soldier under orders in releasing some prisoners and executing 9 of them. You did not do this on your own initiative or decision. While that does not excuse your conduct, it affects the degree of the seriousness of your conduct. You are sentenced to a single sentence of 13 years imprisonment. Full credit will be given for the time you have spent in custody. You will remain in the custody of the Tribunal pending the finalisation of arrangements for your transfer to the state where you will serve your sentence. You may sit down. Isak, Musliu, if you would please stand. The Chamber finds you not guilty on all counts in the indictment. The Chamber orders that you be immediately released from the United Nations Detention Unit, subject to the completion of the necessary modalities. You may sit down. That concludes this trial. The Chamber will now adjourn.
All rise. Faithful Levy.